believe they are the cause of Gino's death.
Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome once again to another episode of Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller, along with Mike Hightower here, and Mike Tolbert, who is back at his remote studio. Delighted to have you with us, and as always, brought to you by the Jacksonville History Center, where Dr. Alan Bliss and his fine staff help us keep the cameras rolling and the lights lit. And thank you to our donors as well for keeping us on the air.
We appreciate that.
On several occasions, Mike's on Mike has welcomed Jacksonville journalists to talk about stories that they've been working on or perhaps columns that they have written. Well, today's podcast is another one of those type shows, but it's going to be a little different. Recently, the Jacksonville Tributary published a 3-part investigative series entitled Cold-Blooded. It's about the prosecution of Kenneth Hartley, a young black male who was sentenced to the electric chair back in 1991 and for the kidnapping and murder of 17-year-old Gino Mayhew. Our guest today is the Tributary's award-winning investigative reporter, Nichole Manna. Nice to have you with us, who spent 7 months preparing her reporting. Nichole is also a reporter who pried open that can of worms about medical neglect and the deaths at the Duval County Jail, and that was one of the big issues that we covered here on our program at least twice, if not more.
Yeah, at least that.
All right, as well. Meanwhile, Mr. Tolbert, why don't you kick it off for us, please?
Yeah, Nichole, thanks for being with us today, and I'm embarrassed for you for those two guys sitting next to you. We'll get through this.
They've been behaving.
The day is young.
You know, in today's world, for a journalist like you to spend 7 months investigating a story just seems to me to be highly unusual, especially one that is 30 years old. We'll get into the details of that story in a bit, but give us a brief synopsis of what you reported to help us get started. And tell us why this story, what about it above all the other 1990 murders, caused you to want to investigate and report your findings?
Yeah, great question. I kind of want to answer that in 2 parts. I agree. I think it is unusual these days to be able to take 7 months to devote that time to one story. I will say I was working on a few smaller stories while reporting on this, including stuff about jail healthcare, mostly a couple quick write-ups about lawsuits. So there was some other stuff going on. But one thing I love about the Tributary and about a lot of the nonprofit newsrooms we see popping up over the country is that we do have the ability to devote a lot of time to stories like this. So this won't be the first time we spend 7 months on a story, or it won't be the last, is what I meant to say. We'll continue doing big investigations like this. As far as how I found the story, not as simple as looking at all of the murders that happened in 1990 and thinking, oh, this one seems important. We found this through court records. We saw the petition to request an evidentiary hearing in the case. That petition was written by Kenneth Hartley's defense attorneys, was 470 pages, included some of the evidence that they had found that they were bringing up in this petition. And I read that and just thought, holy cow, this is a story. Like, we should devote some time to look into this, not only because of the accusations they were making, but because this does involve somebody who is on Florida's death row.
Give us a little synopsis of the story.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so this story centers on the prosecution involving Kenneth Hartley and his 2 co-defendants, Ronnie Farrell and Sylvester Johnson, in the kidnapping and killing of a 17-year-old named Gino Mayhew. The crime happened in 1991. Mr. Hartley, who is now on death row, was convicted in 1993. And the case and the story really centers around how Kenneth Hartley got to death row. There was no physical evidence against him in this case, or against his 2 co-defendants. There were fingerprints on the truck where Mr. Mayhew's body was found that did not belong to any of the co-defendants. Wild enough, to this day, we still don't know who those fingerprints belong to. The evidence that has come forth comes by way of a man named Sidney Jones, who was the state's star witness. He had called police and said, oh, I saw this huddle. I saw Kenneth Hartley and Ronnie Farrell get Mayhew into a car. Kenneth Hartley had a gun up to his head, and then they leave. There's no witness to the actual murder. And then when the three were arrested, a number of jailhouse informants came forward to tell the state attorney's office that they confessed in these different ways with these stories. So the case really was just about these informants and these eyewitnesses saying that this is what had happened. So that's what the story explores, is just how did he get onto death row. He's not the only person who ended up on death row. His co-defendant, Ronnie Farrell, was also sentenced to death. That sentence was remanded in, I believe, there's so many dates in the story. I believe it was 2016. He was able to successfully argue an effective defense counsel. So he and Sylvester Johnson are now in prison for life.
If you could sort out the characters for us, Kenneth, his two alleged partners, which have now been remanded, and of course the victim, that's in this. So can you I've used the expression, they weren't called good guys. The script said that. Or kind of put that into context of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, so the cast of characters is pretty large. I'll start with the victim, who is Gino Mayhew. He was a senior at Paxton High School. He was 17 years old and apparently was kind of a big dealer, a drug dealer over in Washington Heights, an apartment complex off of Moncrief Road. It's been renamed since all of this, and I wish I could remember the name, but I can't. But
might be a good idea that you not.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't name that. And so he, as it turns out, as we recently learned, didn't actually live at the complex. He sold out of his girlfriend's apartment who lived there. That friend is Juan Brown, who's another character in the story. And then, of course, you have your three defendants. You have Kenneth Hartley. Kenneth had gotten in trouble multiple times before this happened. He was convicted of manslaughter for killing a 15-year-old girl named Angel McCormick with a sawed-off shotgun in front of other people in a laundromat, I believe, at that apartment complex or somewhere nearby. He was sentenced to 10 years for that after pleading guilty and got out on, I believe, good time in 4 years. And then you have Ronnie Farrell, his co-defendant, and Sylvester Johnson, the third co-defendant. And then you bring in the eyewitnesses. Juan Brown gave testimony that he saw, he was in a vehicle and he passed Gino Mayhew's vehicle as he was driving toward the school. So he became a witness to that. Not to jump forward, but there's been some crime scene reconstructionists who have reconstructed that testimony and have said that it's impossible for him to have been able to witness that. And then you have Sidney Jones, of course, was the star eyewitness. He is the person that has a very questionable background, was convicted of perjury in 1979, actually, after he lied as a witness in a murder trial in Duval County. That conviction was fought all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court. They overturned it on a trial technicality. They faulted the judge for not allowing him to recant on the stand. But that didn't absolve Sidney Jones of lying. And then you have, in Hartley's case, the three jailhouse informants that I focused on. Ronald Bronner, who had informed in other cases, his kind of partner in this, Eric Brooks, and then a third man named Anthony Parkin. And they all were in jail in the Duval County Jail at the same time as Kenneth and his co-defendants.
Now, Mayhew himself, even though he was 17, did have a record too, did he not?
I actually, because he's 17, I wasn't able
We weren't
to
able to
find.
get because it would have been in juvenile.
But he was an acknowledged drug dealer.
Yes.
Okay. Your reporting relied heavily, quite obviously, on extensive court records, handwritten notes, and interviews with people from a case that's over 3 decades old. How'd you get access to those documents and the like, and what challenges did you have in trying to get to these people to talk to them for the story?
Yeah, so I'll start off with the documents. So as I said, we actually found this case just through a routine court search. I mean, a lot of my time is...
What stood out to that, though?
It was...
Something a light bulb must have gone...
Because I think you said it was, 700 pages?
It was 470 pages. Yeah,
that was
exactly.
giving up after 3.
Took me several days to read it. And then it was just the fact that the attorneys had evidence to back up their claims in those documents. So the claim about Sidney Jones having been convicted of perjury and having actually been a paid informant for JSO was never brought up in the original trial. Well, him being a paid informant was brought up. The perjury charge was not. So that is in the new document. And then they had copies of the perjury case. And so stuff like that kind of sticks out to you as a reporter when, like, I'm not just taking for word what you say. I actually see the court records and I see the evidence, and I could see that for myself. So that made it even easier for me to say, like, let's go ahead and spend time on this. From there, I filed many records requests. With JSO, I filed a request just asking for any public document they have related to that investigation. And I got back some crime scene photos. I got back the autopsy. I got back the police report, and a few smaller things. With the state attorney's office, I filed the same request because there was a question about whether or not their conviction integrity unit was looking into his case. At that point, I knew that the unit had touched Ronnie Farrell's case. And so I just put in a record request for any documents that unit or the office had in relation to Kenneth Hartley's conviction. And I got in Journalist World Gold. It was all virtual, given to me over their portal. But it was essentially 20 boxes worth of documents. And then every document was labeled, box 1, part 1, box 2, part 2. And that went on for about 60,000 pages. So actually not really any struggles with getting documents in this case. And so from there, it was just reading everything. And that was honestly the bulk of the reporting and the time it took to do this, because you're reading, you're highlighting, you're noting, and then months later you're going back and you're rereading. And I would find myself, forgetting little details and then finding it and then learning a new detail. So it was just like a lot of reading on my part, and my editor, Casey Frank, also did. I think he read just as much as I did. And then once we had the documents, at that point, the goal is to then talk to every single person who could have touched this case, whether it was a police officer, a prosecutor, a defense attorney, an informant, like anybody's name who came up, I wrote down and made a note to call everybody. And as you said, this is a case that's 30 years old. So a lot of the people have passed away since then, including the original detective, the judge. Kenneth Hartley's first appellate attorney has passed away. So that was difficult, not being able to reach out to those people.
Did anybody refuse to talk to you?
Yes. Actually, a lot of people did. I think it's extremely common for attorneys who are working on active and ongoing cases to not comment, because I think that is probably an ethical breach for them. They need to put, and that's on either side of a case. So of course, none of the attorneys talked to me. I went door knocking and I was trying to find Sidney Jones, talked to his brother briefly, talked on the phone with Sidney Jones for all of 5 seconds. And he never called me back. And I tried finding some of the informants. There was one informant who was still alive. And I went to his house and talked to him briefly. And when me and Casey had asked him, will you talk to us about this case? He just very slowly put up his hands and backed off into his house. So we didn't get to talk to him. And then within this is also, I think like 8 to 10 written sworn affidavits, some of them handwritten by the people themselves, who were in jail at the same time, who didn't inform, but said, I witnessed them pleading or scheming. I saw them reading Kenneth Hartley's documents. I heard them say that they were going to lie because they wanted to get out in prison. So I actually reached out to a lot of those folks and was able to talk to a man named Larry Wynn, who is in prison on a life sentence for the charge he had in 91. He declined to inform on Kenneth and is in prison still. And so I talked to him very briefly just about how the process of informing worked.
It looks like you focused an awful lot on jailhouse informants. How common is it for jailhouse informants to play a big role in trials? And are they reliable?
Apparently back then it was very important, and they played a big role in a lot of investigations. It was, I think it was the jail at one point was described to me as this like hive of informants. There was just a lot of people who knew that if they came to the state, whether that be a prosecutor or a detective with a story, they could work out a deal. It was very common if you came forward to be rewarded in some way for that testimony. The third part of the story kind of goes into how that has kind of fallen. Like, we don't see informants being used as often. And the way they're used is, and it's because they're not reliable. There's cases that I found that have been overturned in the last 5 to 10 years because they relied on informants who have now either said that they made up the story or other evidence, including DNA evidence, prove that their story was made up and fake. So now what you see, and I saw just scanning through the Supreme Court website, a case that I didn't write about that happened here in Duval County, where somebody was actually given a recording device in the jail to go talk to a suspect. And he was told, you can't bring up the case, you can't lead him into this, but just wear this device and see if he confesses and talks about anything. So they're still being used. I think they're just being used differently.
As a matter of transparency, Mike Tolbert and I have known George Batey for many years. It's a part of this. So, disclosure for discovery. You wrote that George Batey declined to speak on the record, but you did have a 90-minute discussion with him. Would you talk about it? I guess the weather. Anyway, so given this conversation that you're having with us, can you describe the tone of that discussion?
I can't say. The meeting was off the record. So anything from that, it would be a breach of journalism ethics and of my personal ethics to even, describe his demeanor. The only thing I could say is that he gave us a statement about his overall career. I don't have it in front of me, but I know he said that he always felt he was very honest in his prosecutions. He always felt that he shared, what he needed to share with defense counsel, and that he preached that honesty to everybody in the office.
Yeah, I think that's because I was going to follow up with you on there, because did you find a pattern or trend in George's cases? That is, and what were they?
So that is another, going back to a previous question of what made the story compelling for us to look into. In that 470-page document, there are many references to Mr. Batey having a reputation of using jailhouse informants. I think virtually every case is the term that was used. And we've found that to be interesting. So I started talking to other defense attorneys in the county. I talked to a former coworker of his, Frank Tassoni. They only worked together for 5 years, but worked together. And I started looking at his other cases and pulling other appeals. When you're sentenced to death, you get an immediate appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. And then more often than not, you have many other appeals that come. So when you look at cases of people who are on death row right now, there's really an abundance of documents. So I was reading through other cases and saw the informants issue come up in other cases. And I know through documents that Ronald Bronner had informed on at least 2 other cases, including one that Mr. Batey prosecuted. So that was kind of like the biggest reoccurring theme we found. And then everybody I talked to said, oh yeah, he used informants all the time. And it kind of seems like, one person at some point said, everybody was using informants, but he used them a little bit more than everybody else.
Let's get back to the evidence for just a moment, or if you will, the alleged evidence. What was the most surprising piece of evidence that you uncovered when you were going into this thing?
I late in the reporting, maybe about a month and a half out from publishing, because understand, as I'm reading through these documents, I'm filing more record requests, I'm making phone calls, I'm writing as, I'm reporting so I don't forget anything. And at some point I was like, I should probably file a record request with the state attorney's office for Ronnie Farrell's case. And at that point, I knew that the Conviction Integrity Unit had looked into his case. Where they're at with that, we do not know. So I filed a request. I got a much smaller return, probably because of their review. And in that pile of documentations, I got this a copy of an email that a former JSO detective, John Zipperer, had sent Ronnie Farrell's appellate attorney in 2008. At this point, Zipperer had left the police department and was kind of working as, I believe, like an investigator for Farrell's attorneys. And he wrote an email to Rick Sikta, his Farrell's attorneys, saying Sidney Jones is a lying piece of Yeah, you could fill in the blanks there. And the email confirmed that he was blackballed by the department, and that it went on further to say nobody will admit why he was blackballed. That's been a huge question of ours, because we have Sidney Jones's, it almost looks like an application to be an informant. It's like a sheet of paper with his name, his address, his birthday. It just looks like a job application. And I think 10 to 15 payment vouchers, and the word blackballed is scrawled across his application, and the last payment voucher that I have. The last payment voucher happened, I want to see, like a week before Gino Mayhew was killed. And so it's hard to say exactly when he was blackballed. Was it before the killing? It certainly looks like it was before the trial, but nobody's ever been able to really say when he was blackballed or why he was blackballed. And so I love that email confirmed that we still don't know and that nobody is admitting to it. And I think it's pretty huge to have this detective, who was a detective in the 90s at this time, called the state's star witness a liar.
In your reporting on this, I'm wondering, is this more about an innocent man being wrongly sentenced to die, or is it about a perceived botched, perhaps railroaded prosecution, or a little bit of both?
I'm glad you asked that. So his attorneys, Kenneth Hartley's attorneys, have actually not filed a claim of innocence. And their claim is ineffective prosecution, essentially. So I think it would be...
What do they say that again?
They have not filed...
no, what they're calling.
Oh, I think ineffective prosecution is essentially how you could wrap that up.
All right.
Most of the issues all of the issues that they've brought up are based on the informants, the use of informants, information about them not being disclosed to the jury.
And none of that was corroborated by anybody. In other words, your jailhouse snitch, as they are called inside, not that I know firsthand, but
In your former life?
no. But there are all these stories, but there was no corroboration. Where is the proof of that you overheard this? Where,
Yeah.
None of that was in there.
That brings up a really great point that I didn't even think about bringing up. In the trial, it was made out to be that Ronald Bronner and Eric Brooks acted independently of each other, that all three of these informants overheard the confession or were given the confession separately. But we actually have jail logs showing that Brooks and Bronner were moved into Kenneth Hartley's cell. Was that to solicit a confession? That's what Hartley's attorneys say. Who knows? Right. But it is clear in documentation that they were together while they were working on this confession. And later, I don't think I've said this yet, but Bronner and Eric Brooks have passed away. And before Bronner died, he contacted a local attorney, admitted that he made up the story, admitted that he worked with Eric Brooks, and told a friend of his while sitting at the Golden Corral that he made up the story, and that he often made up stories against people, but he felt the worst about Mr. Hartley because he got sent to death row.
But Hartley's still on death row.
Yes.
But the other two have been remanded to life.
Right. The first one was remanded to life. The second one was originally sentenced to life.
What do you think will happen? And what's your gut for a decision?
That is so hard to say. I know that they are, when I say they, Kenneth Hartley's attorneys are fighting for an evidentiary hearing. If that is approved, what will happen is they'll bring in witnesses who are involved in the case. So it's likely that Hartley's original defense attorney, Bob Willis, will be called to testify. That's why he wouldn't talk to me on the record. Again, going back to, it would probably be unethical of him to do that before this. It's possible they'll call George Batey. Since two of the informants have now died, it is possible they'll call Anthony Parkin, who's the third informant. We could even see the attorney who Ronald Bronner confessed to called. And then, of course, the expert who said that Juan Brown's statement couldn't have physically happened. So you'll see all of these people get called in for this hearing. From there, the judge, Judge London Kite, can decide either, nope, this is not enough for an evidentiary hearing, and she could, or for an appeal, you are on death row. She could say, let's have a new trial. Let's have a new punishment phase trial. Let's just remand him to life. It's kind of, you have no idea what's going to be said because there's so many options.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
The 2 jailhouse paid informants who are dead, did I understand one or both before they died said they lied, or just one?
Just one. And the one who didn't say anything died first. He died in 2020, I believe. Ronald Bronner had been in and out of federal prison for drug charges. He got out of federal prison, found an attorney here who I believe had represented him in a case before, confessed to him about lying, said he wanted to clear his conscience, and then died 6 months later. By that point, Hartley's attorneys, for whatever reason, I'm not sure, weren't able to talk to him directly. So instead, the attorney that he recanted to wrote a signed sworn affidavit about what that conversation entailed. Once Hartley's attorneys had that, they went through, to my understanding, and found other inmates who were in jail and in the pod that they were in the 90s. So that's where all of these affidavits come up saying, we heard them discuss the trial. They said that they were lying. So that's kind of how it trickled down from there.
I don't want to have you cross the line of investigative journalist, but...
Oh, boy. It's time for me to go.
Welcome to Mike's on Mike. I've got to ask this question. Unlike your executive editor, who will give you his opinion at the drop of a dime, we have to ask you, after all the time you've invested, all the resources you've invested into this, you've become probably the city's greatest expert on this case based on this 7 months investigation you've done. What do you think? Is he guilty or innocent?
Man, that is, again, his attorneys are not filing a claim for innocence. It's actually funny that you asked that, because I actually wasn't looking at this as is he guilty or innocent, because his attorneys weren't. So I don't know.
Nichole, what is it you want your readers to take away from this story, from all this reporting? All the time you spent, what do you want them to carry most away from all this?
I kind of this. Like, I would love for them to talk about it and think about the case and think about, the prosecution that led up to this and how our criminal justice system ran in the 90s, and think about how it runs today. Have conversations with your friends about, the death penalty. As I know, I think a lot of my friends are like, I don't want to talk about politics. And I'm like, no, let's do it. Let's talk about the death penalty. Let's talk about these things. So I would love for the story to just start a conversation in your circles. And even beyond the story, kind of what I said at the beginning, I would love for people to take away that this is what the Tributary is here for.
You're right.
We are here to dive into the stories that other people will look at and say, this is too much, or we don't have the resources to do this. We don't have the time, the people. We do. And this is why we're here. And, we want to continue doing stories that are really in depth and really complicated, and start conversations and, maybe have impact, hopefully.
Let me ask one final question, and that is, what's next? Do you intend to follow this up with other investigative reports on criminal cases? And if you do, I want to talk to you, because I've got one that happened in the 1990s that was on Harry Shorstein's watch. We can share a lot of information with.
Yeah, give me a call. I've been a reporter, a journalist for, I think, 12 years now, and have only ever covered criminal justice. It's just something I find really interesting, and I love that there's a lot of nuance in stories like this. So you'll continue to see criminal justice related stories from me. I'm sure there will be more jail reporting, more healthcare reporting at the Duval County Jail.
Good.
And of course, not to scoop myself or anything, but when you publish a series like this, there's always going to be follow-ups. So this will most likely not be the last time you read about Kenneth Hartley in the Tributary.
Okay. From time to time, we finish up our podcast by doing a lightning round. I'll start it out. State Attorney's Conviction Integrity Review Division.
Important. Florida leads actually in death row exonerations in the state.
Washington Heights Apartment Complex, or whatever it is now.
Hard to live in, at least back then.
Robert Willis.
Really nice guy. Heard great things about him.
Okay.
Blackballed.
Would love to know more about it.
Okay. Judge Hudson Olaf.
Somebody who left behind a legacy. I believe I read that sorry, this is more than 30 words. Oh my gosh. He put more people on death row than I think any other judge in Duval County.
Carried a gun.
Oh yeah, he carried a gun.
Carried a gun in the house. Yeah, that's right. The term cold-blooded.
This is an interesting term that came up a lot in the reporting from kind of both sides. And I thought when you're running through name ideas for stories, that was just one I thought of pretty early and it kind of stuck.
How about fear? F-E-A-R.
Probably pretty true. Probably a lot of fear in coming forward and being a witness to any type of crime.
The Innocence Project.
They have a tough job.
Tell us a little bit more about the Innocence Project, though. Give us 15 seconds on who they are and what they do.
Yeah, they're a countrywide organization. They have local offshoots too, including here in Florida. And they look at, don't quote me, I think maybe just death penalty cases. But they look at cases like Hartley's to bring to appeal, and they look at wrongful convictions essentially.
4th District Circuit Court Judge London Kite
Has a tough job.
Guys, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you, Nichole. Thank you, Nichole, with us. By the way, I can't wait for the Netflix film. I think it's going to be great, and we'll put it in there.
Great.
As we wrap things up here, in several of the podcasts that we've done in the past, we've lamented how city council members who run or work for nonprofits have a habit about using city budget for cash as a cash cow, often ignoring the rules and voting late at night to give their organizations thousands of tax dollars. In the past, the mayors criticized the process, but now Mayor Deegan is trying to do something about it. In the coming weeks, we'll be paying very close attention to the legislation introduced by Mayor Deegan to put brakes on that kind of practice. If her legislation passes, it will require a supermajority vote by the council and disclose of any connections between city officials and the nonprofit. But once again, we'll be following this very, very carefully, and I'm sure you will hear podcasts dealing with this issue as it makes its way through city council.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for joining us again.
Tickets and popcorn now.
Yeah, it may even be
Popcorn now.
It may be a double feature, so hold on to your hats here, folks. Thanks for all joining. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate you being with us. And once again, our thanks to the Jacksonville History Center. And we'll see you all again next week. Thank you.
Y'all take care. Thank you.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.